European Union and other countries. And we believe that that is fundamentally wrong. There needs to be a balance. As I said earlier, obviously the economy is an important factor, but the human rights and respect for minority rights needs to be an equal part in the negotiations, and therefore we clearly see that that is something that needs to be built into the negotiations. I should say here that we are also in favour of, as the Green Party of England and Wales, of the accession of Turkey to the European Union in principle. But we've always made it clear that there are conditions to this. If, as in this case, minority rights are not respected, if human rights are not respected, then that is a reason to not proceed. Again, there's a clear yes to this from us. It is the position of any small country that is in a geopolitical situation as Armenia is always very difficult. But these issues need to be resolved through negotiation and not through force. And obviously, as Baroness Cox has said before, blockades are an anachronism. I mean, they were never right, but certainly in these days, in these times, it is something that should not happen, and that the European Union should take a very proactive role in its relations with other countries to prevent or reverse if they exist. We have always supported the OSCE sort of peace brokerage mission, but unfortunately it hasn't brought us very far. So we do believe that the European Union should take a much more proactive role in this process. The answer to that is yes. There are, and again, I would like to just give another example. The situation in Sri Lanka has until very recently received very little public attention, and it's another case like the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, where there is an imbalance or a sliding scale of attention that is completely unjustified and unjustifiable. It is quite clear that something needs to be done about this, and that there is no reason why one unrecognized state or one country should receive aid and not another. Again, this applies to Turkey, but it applies to all other countries in this world. Facing up to your own history needs to be an integral part of moving forward. And this is something that clearly needs to be demanded in this case as well. I totally agree with what Baroness Cox has said earlier, that you cannot move forward if you are not facing up to your past.
I would like to just refer to one statement made by Erdogan a few days ago. He, for the first time ever, I think, a Turkish prime minister acknowledged ethnic cleansing in Turkey. So maybe we're making, maybe there is progress coming in Turkey, and maybe we're moving forward towards the day when Turkey will recognize the Armenian genocide. Jonathan was with us, for those who were there 2 years ago. We organized a conference in a similar format, but of course not pre-electoral. We wanted to look at European policy, so we did that with him 2 years ago, and today we meet again. Jonathan.
Thank you, Nicola, and good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you again. Perhaps I should tell you, for those who don't know me, a little bit about myself, a little bit about my involvement in Armenian affairs, past, present, and I hope future, and then, of course, a little bit about what the Liberal Democrats are standing for in these elections. My own contact with the Armenian community began as a small child, because although I consider myself these days a typical Londoner, in other words, an immigrant. I was born in Manchester, and Armenian restaurants in Manchester were the only alternative, and a delicious alternative, to fish and chips when I was a child. But more seriously, I became involved in Armenian affairs, and especially the situation of the Armenian Turks in Turkey, because of my work with HEN, the international organization which looks at the rights of writers, essayists, novelists, and journalists. And through that I got to know Hrant Dink, and of course was absolutely devastated when he was assassinated in Istanbul, and I wrote his obituary for The Guardian. I also had the pleasure of visiting Armenia 3 years ago in 2006, travelled widely, particularly visiting churches and monasteries, including some right up near the border, or if we can call it the border with Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, to get back to more political issues, in relation to the questions, of course, I, as an individual, and indeed the Liberal Democrats as a party, think that the door should be opened for Armenia at some time in the future to have that possibility of joining the European Union. I wouldn't dare to put a possible date on it. I think anyone who did would be risking attacks from all sides, but I think that the case for eventual Armenian membership of the European Union is very strong, and certainly it is something I would wish to be following very closely. Again, both myself as an individual and the party as a whole, we are enthusiastic supporters of Turkey's membership of the European Union, but as Uta just said, providing that the necessary conditions are met. Economic criteria, political criteria, covering a very wide range of issues, which mean that any applicant state has to have proved its democratic legitimacy, has to have a good human rights record, has quite specifically to recognize ethnic minorities and their full cultural rights. And obviously, Turkey has to fit in and to fall in line on those issues. Now, I'm someone who has actually been quite encouraged, and I was delighted that Nicola made a sort of glancing reference to this at the end of your comments, by some of the things that have been happening recently. There's still an awfully long way to go. I won't be really happy until Article 301 has gone and maybe even rewrite the Turkish constitution, but that's probably not in my power to ask that to happen. But I'm very encouraged, actually. I've had quite a lot of contact with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Prime Minister, and various other people in the Turkish government. And I think there is a real willingness, slowly but surely, to come to terms with history. But it's a difficult thing. We mustn't, it's the history of the Armenian massacres, the Armenian genocide, is a very painful memory for Armenians, obviously. But it's also a very difficult memory, a very difficult period of history for Turks to come to terms with. And I believe that this is a process that's got to be done together in a spirit of wanting to get to a result at the end, not through confrontation, not through stridency, but actually recognizing that there are steps in the right direction and encouraging those steps to go further. Which is why I suppose my one hesitation about the terminology of the question comes relating to question 7, when the EU resolution was passed about basically saying one couldn't even consider the possibility of Turkish membership until the genocide had been recognized. I would maybe step one back further than that and say, well, we've got to consider it. We are considering it. That is the reality. Of course, as someone who believes, again, as an individual and as a Liberal Democrat, that the European Union's great richness